All right, let's get going. First of all, let's talk about the human brain and bias. You know, we process lots and lots of information. You're processing information at millions and millions and millions and millions a bit right now as we are sitting in this room. And the issue is, you know, we're human. We can't all process that stuff at the same time in the same place. So one of the things that you know is we can only, out of all these millions of pieces of information, we can only process about 40 bits of it. You know, and it makes you think, well, I'm only using 10% of my brain. Now you're using all of it, but it's the way you process information. So what we do, we take mental shortcuts in how we do things, and some of those mental shortcuts, some of those little short circuits, are how we go about connecting the dots by how we view the world and how we perceive events. So what you have here is this. Look at this. Unconscious bias is not even subconscious. It goes even deeper than that. At the top of this iceberg, you have conscious. When you get into subconscious stuff, it goes deep. And a lot of us don't realize sometimes, and I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, that you may have a situation that happens at your firm and you get upset about it, but you don't realize why you're upset about it because it's triggered something really deep down inside. It's triggered something on that subconscious level, and you're kind of like, I know I'm ticked off about this, but I don't know why. But you go back and you kind of think about it, and then you put the pieces together. So that is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with all that deep stuff. And it's deep. It's very deep. All right, let's talk about something. You know, a lot of people, people are like, well, you know, this unconscious bias stuff is just a bunch of New Age stuff. No, it's really not. It's really not. It is about ways that we have beliefs and attitudes that is not intentional. You know, it's not intentional. The example that I just gave to you about my big law firm experience, I'm going to tell you, that was not intentional. I really don't believe it was intentional. I really don't believe that these particular individuals intended to exclude me, and I don't think they intended for that message that they conveyed to land the way that it did with me. I don't think they intended it, but I do think it was something they just didn't think about. It's just never occurred to them. And when you have people that it's never occurred to you, that's a signal that you're dealing with something that's subconscious, okay? So, you know, we can sit there and say, oh, I'm not racist, oh, I'm this and I'm that, but you know what? That's not true, because we all are, because if you have a brain, you have bias. So, what does that mean? It means that we have beliefs that we hold unconsciously from the information that we process consciously. Read this for a moment and tell me what you think about that. Just take a minute and read that. Yeah. I've actually thought that too. So just when you think that you don't have a bias, you know, something can pop up in your life and you realize that you do. I mean, think about it. You guys go, let's say you're going out, I'm walking up and down the street here over the lunch hour, and you see someone, and maybe they're dressed in a, you know, maybe they're wearing plaid and stripes, or maybe they're not wearing anything. I could go there too. But you look at them, and all of a sudden, you make assumptions about them. And some of the assumptions you make, or you make them within seconds, and you don't even realize that you've done that. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. All right, what is it? It's triggered automatically, and it includes not only our thoughts, but yeah, it does include our stereotypes. And we all have stereotypes about the people we interact with. We even may have stereotypes about ourselves sometimes. You know, that can happen. So, you know, when you say that this process happens, it happens quickly. And that's why a lot of people, when they are made aware of their unconscious biases, get really freaked out about that. But once you are made aware of it, you can change your behavior. That's one thing that has been proven true in a lot of studies. All right, so we have tons of different things that influence how we come about making decisions. You know, it's all of these things that we've grown up with. It's all of these things that we observe every day. It's stuff we see on TV. It's music that we listen to. So everybody has bias. Now, some people may have bias to a greater degree than others, but you can't walk out of this room and say, I don't have bias. And actually, the people who say that the loudest are the ones who have it the most. Have you ever noticed that? You know what my favorite thing is? This is one of my favorite ones. Have you, and those of you may have heard this, the ladies in here of color, you know, when people come up to you and they say to you, well, I have friends who are black. Like, why would I particularly want to know that? And what is the context in when you're sharing that with me, you know? Really. So there you go. And there's the people that have the most bias. All right, so what are some of the factors? Where you grew up. Where you grew up. Everybody in here grew up at different places. Maybe you grew up in a single-parent home. Maybe you grew up where the people who raised you were your grandparents. Maybe you grew up in an area that was a lot of affluence, you know? But all of those things have shaped your ideas about how you view the world. They are the glasses through which you look at the world. How you were socialized during your developmental stages. This is kind of interesting. You want to take a class on human growth and development. There's a lot of studies out there that when you were not nurtured when you were young, you did not have a nurturing mother, that can affect your whole outlook in your adult life as to how you communicate with people because you do not have an attachment to people. And, you know, you see people, you can see lawyers practicing law, and you can tell that they've never been hugged, and they've never been this, and they've never been, no, I'm talking, I'm like, y'all think I'm making this shit up, right? I'm not. I'm not. Okay? So we look at who we were exposed to, our social identities and our groups. Let me give you another example of what I'm talking about. I grew up, I'm 57, so I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up in the 60s. And my parents chose to raise us and to go to schools in all-white environments. So when I was growing up in school, I was the only black person in school. I did not go to school, and I never met another black person until I was 14 years old. And I was in Ardmore, Oklahoma in 1974, and that's when they had just integrated the schools. And it was my first experience ever interacting with black people. And that shaped my life in a lot of ways because I was ostracized by my own, because I didn't sound black. And we lived on the white side of town and all of those things. But you see, those are the kinds of things that you may have experiences with in your own unique ways, but they've shaped your attitudes that kind of form your unconscious biases. You know, who we hang with, we really are known by who we hang with, right? And so sometimes some of us need to, like, think about that. Okay. It's like, really? Really? You know, one of the things that I am concerned about because of my age is we have an entire group of millennials whose ideas about women have been formulated by what they hear on music. And you think about that. You hear rap music, you hear some of the denigrating things that women, the terms that women are called and the things that are said about them. And you think, you know, that doesn't affect a person's outlook. It doesn't affect how people view women. You know, it's kind of sad, but that's some of the kind of stuff that goes into the pot that we're talking about. All right, making decisions. You know, we base our decisions based on both our subconscious and our unconscious activities. And so we do use unconscious bias, and it does influence our decisions. You know, it does influence the decision of this firm not to extend me an invitation to the Cattle Barons Ball. So, I mean, it works that way. It affects decisions on all kinds of levels in a law firm. It can affect compensation decisions. It can affect how associates get assigned to work. It affects who they get assigned to work to. You know, whether you're a woman of color, or whatever. So those are kinds of things, you know, they do influence people's decisions. People think, oh, well, I have bias, but, you know, that doesn't, you know, I just make decisions independently of that. No, you don't. You don't. All right, what else do we have here? So our decision-making process is multi-level, isn't it? We look at how we see people, how we talk to them, how we listen to them, how we communicate with them, how much attention we give to someone. All of those kinds of things go, again, in our pot of how we make decisions and how we interact with people. And all of that is tied to the biases that we all hold. So, can you measure it? Can it be tested? Now, this is the $50,000 question. Can it be tested? Well, check this out. We have the implicit association test. How many of you have heard about this? The implicit, oh, good. How many of y'all have taken it? Oh, good, even better. Y'all are like educated. Okay? I love educated women. All right. So what do we have? The implicit association test. A bunch of psychologists from Harvard University and the University of Michigan designed this test. It's about 15 years or more older, and it is a measure, an indirect measure. You know, you can't ever have a precise measure of something, but those of you who've taken it know what it does. You know, you sit there and you look at a picture, and it measures your instantaneous reaction to it. So how slow or how fast you respond by clicking on the keyboard is how it's calculated as to what your response time is and the biases that you have. So it's a really good test. And I want to tell you something. This is something that I use as a training tool. I do a lot of training for companies in-house and what have you. And when I'm doing training for managers particularly, what I do is I tell them beforehand, look, we're going to be doing this training. And over the weekend, y'all go take the IAT. You know, at your own time, and it's voluntary. I don't tell them they have to do it. But I want you to take the test, and I want you to think about it. And when we come together and do our training, you know, let's take that overlay on some of the insights you have found about yourself when we get to issues about talking about workplace harassment, diversity, and all those kinds of things. So that's how I use it. Now, the reason why I say it that way is because Google uses it, you know, in their workforce, and they actually make people take it at work. And the only problem I have with that is this, and I'm a labor and employment law attorney. You know, I don't want somebody saying that you made them take a test like that and that you kept the results of it or you made them report the results of it. And, you know, you kind of get into an area that I think is a little bit out of the line on what you want to do on something like that. So that's my 2-cent management, labor, and employment law advice to you. Malcolm Gladwell, you know, he wrote the book Blink. And, you know, one of the things that he says about this, and it's right, when you take this test and you click on it, I mean, it's like you instantly react. I mean, you have already made a decision before you even hit the keyboard to make that selection. And so, you know, it really can give you some insight into your beliefs about a whole bunch of things. It's a great test, and I really like to use it. So here's what it looks like. And those of you who've seen the words to it, because it can be a whole bunch of different things, and you click on it and you look at a face. Here it just happens to show in this particular example someone who's black, but they have white faces, they have Asian faces, and they have words associated. And sometimes they don't have faces, they have objects associated to it. And again, your reaction time and how you click on the keyboard to answer the test is what's being measured. Now look at this. When they first started out, they didn't have a whole bunch of them, but now you can like pick a whole bunch of ones on here, and some of these are kind of cool. I mean, look at this. Look at this one at the top. You know, let me ask you something. Those of you who are maybe not labor and employment law attorneys, let me ask you something. Is there a difference between race and color? Is there? Oh yeah, there's a huge difference between race and color. Color is the color of your skin. We have ladies in here that are all kinds of different colors. But it's amazing the unconscious bias that people have of people with different complexions. For example, I've had many cases where you can have discrimination and harassment between two black folks, and it's simply based on the color of their skin. You maybe have a light-complected person that is behaving inappropriately to a darker-complected person, you know, and we have terms that we use to describe that. So, you know, that is an interesting test to take because, you know, people start to think about that. Look at this other one, weight. Oh, there's all kinds. I'm going to show you a slide here in a moment about the unconscious bias that we have in society as a whole, not just in the legal profession, against people with, you know, who have various different weights. And it could be someone on this end of the spectrum or somebody who's really, really, really thin, you know, and people make assumptions about that person. You know, one of my favorite stories I tell people is this when I'm training managers. You may have someone who is very, very, very thin. Do not go up to her and tell her to eat a sandwich. No, don't do that. She may be anorexic. That's kind of going to send her into this tailspin. She may be, you know, a cancer survivor, and maybe she's just gone through a round of chemo, and you don't know the situations. But either way you go, people make judgments about that. They make all kinds of judgments about that. So you've got all these different ones. You gender, you know, you get down here, and you're looking at the link between gender and family, you know, environments and stuff like that, and careers. They have added one here for Asian Americans. They've added one in the last few years for sexual orientation and preference. And again, you know, it it shows these things. Religion right now, that is a problem here in America right now. We have people that are making inappropriate comments, for example, in the workplace about those who are Muslim and of things of that nature. And so people have biases about that. And the problem is on some of that stuff, that's conscious stuff, right? It's not unconscious stuff. That's actually conscious stuff. All right, so what has this shown? We're all good people, but we all have biases. Been taken over 14 million times. How about this one? 75% of prefer white people over black people. There was a study in 1964 with some 4-year-olds. Okay, think about this. Back in 1964, you have a bunch of little black children, and they give them some dolls. They have a white doll and they have a black doll. The black children chose the white doll more times than anything else. Now think about that. 4 years old. And we have already developed biases, okay, as young as that age. 76% prefer people without a disability. People will sit there and say, oh, that doesn't matter. They're just like me. But that's not what they're thinking. They say inappropriate things. How about this one? They associate men with careers and women with families. And we still see that in law firms, right? We still see that in law firms. It's like, well, and you'll see like subtleties of it. What is another subtlety of it? I'll kind of jump ahead a little bit. What about this one? Have you seen this one in law firms, unconscious bias? If you are a single female, then you are presumed to work the long hours and to be on the partnership track. But if you are a mom, it's like, well, you wouldn't want to work those long hours, and so we're not even going to ask you or give you an assignment on that case, which could be helpful for your career to move up the partnership track because you wouldn't want to travel. And, it's making an assumption, right? But that's what we do. But we think about that things. And so some of those things can even be subtleties within just, gender. I took this, and I have biases. And I've taken this test 3 times, and I still prefer white people over black people. And it's been eye-opening for me. I mean, and I've taken some of the other ones, and it's just, you just have to be conscious of it and think about it. I mean, think about it when you take this test. What does this mean? What do I mean? What am I doing? How am I processing information when I even communicate with people about some of the biases that I have? All right, so how should it be used? I mean, there's a whole lot of controversy out here right now about this. As I said, I like to use it as a training tool. I like for people to, understand themselves. And there's always something good to be said about having dialogue about that in the appropriate form and environment. What you don't want to do is, like as I alluded to earlier, is to take some test like this, throw it inside a company organization, and then just sit there and, broad sweep people, or sit there and have a meeting where you make everybody disclose what their test results were on it and stuff like that. That's like not cool. Not cool. All right, so how should it not be used? It is not. And think about this. It is not a predictor of actual behavior. And that's where the rubber meets the road when it comes to how this test is used in litigation and employment litigation. Somebody may have a bias, but that does not always correlate with them acting on that bias. So, that's where you get into Title VII and all of the EEO laws, where you look at the theories of having to have intentional discrimination. For disparate treatment cases or disparate impact, you still have to have some kind of act. So the courts have held, and this has been a pretty consistent thing, you can't use that. That is insufficient evidence. It does not meet the Daubert standard for bringing some kind of lawsuit about that. So what you have here is you have this one guy, and I just lost his name, but he's been going around the country as an expert witness. He did this in 2 cases. One of them was Walmart, and another one, and he basically said that we have this rampant discrimination among this class of women and minorities. And the only inference that could be drawn from that is that they have unconscious bias. And the problem with that is, number one, none of the people that he's talking about ever took the test, so he doesn't even know what they'd score on it. And number two, he could not point to a specific act that anybody did. And that's what the whole case was about. It's like you're sitting there saying we have these management practices. Yes, on the surface they may have an impact on women, but you've still got to point to some kind of practice of what it is. You still got to pick it out. So that's where that is dangerous to use. And, you know, you got to be aware of that from a litigator standpoint when you see this popping up, because there's a lot of cases now popping up around the country about the controversy of how it is being used. Okay? It's a fact. Happens all the time in the workplace. I know many of you in here throughout your careers have had experiences like that we could probably talk about all afternoon. But it's real and it's true. All right, let's talk about some things. Let's talk about there's different kinds of biases in the paper that you've seen. I've written about the different categories. Let's talk about some of the examples. Let's talk about this one. This is my favorite one. What do you think I'm talking about there? You hire people who are just like you. And in our profession, ladies, if you are a white male, that's what that means. That's what that means. And it may even be a certain white male. You know, it may be a blonde, blue-eyed white male. It may be, you know, and it's like, and they're not even thinking about it. It's just a natural thing. You know, he looks like I did when I was his age. You know, and that kind of assumption. And so we basically favor people like that. Now, that being said, let me turn it around, because it goes both ways. It does go both ways. You may have somebody at a law firm who is, you know, Hispanic, and only, you know, really likes the Hispanic, you know, applicants that come in there for summer associates positions. And again, relates to that person because of their culture and maybe their shared same language. So it's the same thing. I'm not just picking on white guys, okay? But my point is that's what we do. And we have to overcome that. And one of the ways you overcome that is by having different people on the interviewing process. You don't just have one person in the firm doing all the interviews who's going to have that bias. You kind of mix it up and have a bunch of people doing it, and it eliminates that effect. This one here is an interesting one. This is a fascinating study. So this particular group sent out 1,300 job ads, and what they did, these resumes were all equal. Equal qualifications, equal everything. But they had different names on them, okay? So you have Emily and Greg, and then you have Lakeisha and Jamal, and they go out. So what happens? Emily and Greg get 50% more callbacks. What's in a name? What's in a name? And when they went back and tried to just like improve the quality of the resumes for Lakeisha and Jamal, so Lakeisha and Jamal were technically, on paper, more qualified than Emily and Greg, made no difference. Made no difference. So you think about that in a law firm situation. You think about that when people are having applications for a summer associate program, and you've got some partners in the firm, or maybe you've got somebody, you know, not your recruiters, because recruiters don't tend to do this, but the people in the firm do, and you guys know what I'm talking about. But they'll look at a resume, and they'll sit there and automatically assume what somebody is by the name. They will. I mean, and it's not just race. I've had people like, well, that sounds like a Jewish name. Or that sounds like a fill-in-the-blank name. You know, and they're making assumptions about that. So it is the perception and the stereotype that's being created, and they've never, in fact, met that person. Another example of this is a fellow named Jose. He had put his resume on Monster.com, was not getting any hits at all. He dropped the S out of it and said his name was Joe, and all of a sudden he got a bunch of hits. You know, so I mean, this is real. This really does go on. And in law firms in particular, we've got to build in systems where we have blind, you know, types of process in place in the pre-employment systems so we eliminate that kind of stuff. Let me give you another example. This is actually not so much, it's a blend of conscious and unconscious. We have a partner law firm who gets from the office manager some resumes, and he's looking at people he wants to hire for a summer associate program, and he does the hugest no-no ever known to man. He Googles them first, which you cannot do, okay? You cannot do that. And what did he find out? One of the applicants had said that she just came back from the Houston LGBT Gay Pride Parade. She did not say she was lesbian. She just said she attended the parade. This dude prints that off, staples it to the resume, writes on it, this is a Christian firm, and we don't hire these people. Yeah, and we're lawyers, right? We are lawyers. Look at this one, okay? Beauty bias. Oh, let's talk about this one big time, right, ladies? Oh, seriously. Seriously. It's like, candidates who are viewed more physically attractive, they get job offers. So for all the rest of us that are not Miss America, life sucks for us. It just kind of does. But, think about that. Let's be more practical. How many of y'all have worked with a firm that wants a certain look? You know what I mean? A certain look, a certain persona. Let's say you have a woman of color that comes into an interview and she's wearing braids. Or let's use me. A lot of people, like when I first started wearing my hair this short, they're like, well, Katrina, and let me tell you what I was told at the firm that will remain nameless, but everybody knows who it was. I started wearing my hair like this, and it trickled back to me through another partner that people thought I was being militant. Militant, that is the word, an angry black woman, okay? And not like asking me why I wear my hair this short, it's because I'm too lazy to fix it. And speaking of perception bias, let me tell you another one. I'm doing some training for some managers. We stop at a break, and the HR manager comes up to me, and she says, Katrina, I need to tell you something. I said, what? Those people in the back of the row back there, they think you're a lesbian. I'm like, what? And she said, because somebody said, when you wear your hair short like that, you're a lesbian. Okay, so when you're doing training like this, these are called teachable moments. So I get up there in front of these group of managers, and I said, I need to talk to y'all about something. First of all, I am not a lesbian because I wear my hair this short. I wear it because I'm lazy. And if you have any other questions that are not relevant to what we are talking about today about my personal life, you can ask them at the break, and you can hear a pin drop. You know what I mean? It's just like, really? But people do that. It is perception bias, isn't it? It is. So, some of you have probably had that experience. How many of you remember, I'm dating myself even more, how many of you were practicing back in the 80s? Do you remember when you had to show up for an interview and those little suits with those little tie things on them? Remember those? I had and you were dressed like a guy, but you kind of weren't, with the big shoulder pads. But it was the same thing, right? You could not go to an interview. You had to that was the look for female lawyers back then. And now it's it's all over the place. It's far more relaxed. Right now you can go into federal court and wear pants and not get screamed at by a judge or in state court, whereas you used to do that before. All right, look at this one. Same thing with compensation. If you have below average looks, guess what? You don't get to make as much money as everybody else. So you overlay on that gender, you overlay on that a woman who is a person of color, and you've got a real situation there that's just completely ridiculous, right? Because it doesn't reflect what that person's abilities are. It's just looking at who that person is on the outside and then having stereotypical thoughts about that. All right, confirmation bias. This is a big one. Now, this is an interesting one. A company does a study. They get 60 partners from different law firms, and they send out briefs, okay? These briefs are identical. Third-year lawyer, they tell them they're from New York University, and they had, the brief intentionally had these errors in it. So they did this brief, and they intentionally put those errors in. And then what they did was, some of the partners knew that Thomas Meyer was white, and some of the partners knew that Thomas Meyer was black. Look what happened. If you were a black Thomas Meyer, you got scored lower. Okay? Spelling errors noted, you had more. Technical errors, you had more. Fact, all of that. Across the board. Now, it gets even better. Look at what some of the partners wrote. Some of their comments that they wrote. Okay? Now let's talk about the real world. Y'all know that goes on in law firms today. Okay? You could put a woman in there, and it could be a man. It could be a partner making an assessment about a woman or a man, or it could be an assessment about a woman of color or a man of color or whatever. but this stuff goes on. And people act like we don't have bias, and we do. And in this particular case, people who do that, they don't think that they are acting intentionally. And that's the whole point. They really don't. I mean, they really don't think that what they're doing is wrong because they're not aware of it on a conscious level. So, what do we have? We have action. Tell me what this is, ladies. How many of you have been interrupted? Somebody talk to me. Talk to me. Okay? That pisses me off. Okay? It just does. Somebody give us an example of interruption. Anybody? Anybody? Come on, speak up.
We were in a hearing.
Okay?
Last week, or earlier this week, Monday, and I was trying to make a point to the judge, and the opposing counsel, who was a male, felt the need to interrupt me, and I just let the comment slip. Oh, thanks for interrupting me. He's like, I'm sorry, counsel, I'm sorry, but continues to talk to make his point over me.
Had you been a man, that would not have happened.
Well, but then if we interrupted him, he would be like, "You're interrupting me."
Yeah.
like immediately.
Yeah. And expect you to be in your place and not say anything. Exactly. How about mansplaining? Talk to me, people. Talk to me. How many of y'all had this one? Okay? You're sitting there. You are a JD. Okay? And you have another JD explaining something to you like you were a first-year law student. Okay? And you're like, I'm not stupid. You know what I mean? But it's just condescending, right? But it's done without conscious thinking. You know, it's conscious thinking. Oh, I like this one. How many of y'all had that one? How many of y'all have ever had that one? Okay? Let me see some hands, ladies. Let me see some hands. Okay? You could be sitting in a meeting, talking to a bunch of people in the firm, and you say, I have an idea about widget client. And everybody keeps talking. 30 minutes later, the male partner says, I have an idea about widget client. It's like, that's a great idea. And you're sitting there like, what just happened here? Okay? But this, again, it's unconscious bias, isn't it? It's like, well, maybe she can have a good idea, and maybe we're not even thinking that her input is valuable. So you have that kind of stuff. Okay, here's another one in action. This is a funny one. The story, chairman of the board is introducing some board members, got a female and a male. What does he do? He gets up there and tells everybody about her background and her kids, and she's a member of the book club, and he says, you know, I'd like to welcome the beautiful Jackie to the board. Really, okay? He introduces the man and talks about all of his professional qualifications, his contributions to the community, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, well, he never talked about hers. There's a reason why she got selected, because she's like one of the top producers in the country. But that doesn't get mentioned, does it? So that's the kind of stuff that happens. Okay? So let's talk about some scenarios about bias. Let's talk about bias among lawyers. Look at this study. You know, treated differently than their peers, the basis of race or sex. Look at that one. Missed on desirable assignments. They didn't get to work with that partner who would have been the person who was influential on recommending that partnership track person. Because they didn't get to work on that big case. They got to work on the itty-bitty cases. They didn't get to be second chair. They got to be 15th chair. You know, and this is how this kind of stuff happens, right? You know, they don't get the memo. They don't have a conduit through which they can be mentored, and they're just kind of left out there to like shrivel up in the desert. And it's like, how are people supposed to know? How are people supposed to adapt to a culture in a law firm if you haven't grown up there? Whether you're a woman or somebody of color. I mean, how are you supposed to do that if you don't have somebody telling you and giving you feedback? All right, so let's talk about microaggressions. You know, this is another form of stuff that we do. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'll take the first one, Aiken Gump. This was about 1987. No, it was later than that, 1989. I'm leaving the Justice Department because I want to go to the private practice because I have a lot of student loans and the government pays you nothing. So that was the reason why I was interviewing with Aiken Gump, the head of the Labor and Employment Law section. And we have a couple of interviews over the phone that last for at least 45 minutes. And I'm so excited because I think, man, I'm going to have a chance to work at the big firm. So I show up in my power suit and my little bow tie thing, little round one. And I'm sitting out there, and he comes out, and he looks around the room. And then he looks at me and he says, are you Katrina? And I said, yes. And you could just see his face change. He did not realize I was black. because of the sound of my voice. And that interview lasted less than 20 minutes. So, I mean, you know, that kind of stuff goes on. I mean, how many of you have had that experience? You go in someplace and people already have a preconceived idea of even what you look like, ladies, right? And you'll see that. You'll go into a meeting and it's obvious when a man looks at you, he's like, oh, well, that's not what I thought you'd look like. And you're thinking, what do you think I would look like? But, I mean, you can see it on their faces, right? And again, that kind of stuff goes on. So you have that. So then you have, you know, how many of you have had this? You know, you're in a firm and the distribution list goes by and you're not on it. Oops. You don't get the memo. Oops. And it just happens to be the distribution list that you need to know about because there's some big case going on, and maybe if you're an associate, you'd like to have an opportunity to work on it if you could just go tell your supervising partner that you're interested in it. But you didn't know because you were never on the list. Or how about this one? How many of you ever had this one? You know, you go to a client meeting. You may be an equity partner at that firm. Do you get introduced like that? No. You're like, so here's like Sarah. And so anyway, and you're like, I just made a capital contribution to you fools, and you need to introduce me as the equity partner that I am, right? Yes. But that's kind of subtle stuff that goes on, right? So people do that kind of stuff. And as I mentioned here, you know, we're going to, you know, well, you would understand, Katrina, so you should only mentor the black associates. You know, what about mentoring, you know, why can't I mentor a man? Why couldn't I be a mentor to a white male? Wouldn't I have, like, something relevant I could contribute to him? Like, how you practice law or something like that? I mean, you know, how do you write a brief? What do you need to do when you show up to court? Stuff like that. Thank you. So let's talk about what firms need to do. Let's have blind hiring systems, okay? Figure out a way. Law firms can do this. They can have a deal where they redact names so that all you're looking at is qualifications. Don't tell me if they have Adobe Pro Acrobat, they can, like, redact shit. I mean, I'm just like, they can do that, okay? So they do that. We want to have multiple interviewers. You know, you have people from different, maybe even different cultures at a firm. Maybe it's just different perspectives. Maybe you have somebody that's a flaming, you know, Republican. Maybe you put them and have them interview with the flaming Democrat. I mean, you know what I mean? Just kind of mix it up a little bit so that you get different perspectives of how this person presents and what they may bring to the table. And let's do this. Now, this is basic EEO 1, right? 101. You'd be amazed at how many law firms, because we're lawyers and we think we know everything, but we don't comply with the law. And we will ask questions in an interview of a female associate, little subtle things like, you know, what's your career plans? What is that question really asking? Thank you. And what are you going to do with them? And how many are you going to have? And all of that. And it's like, it's the subtle kinds of things. It's the things like asking a female attorney, you know, are you married? And you know you're not supposed to ask that, but you want to find out what her husband does because you want to see if she's, like, really serious about practicing law. You know, that kind of stuff, okay? So we ask everybody, and we have to do training, okay? We have partners that don't understand that there's a law. It's called Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Imagine that. And it applies to them because they have 15 or more employees. You even have to tell the labor and employment lawyers this, okay? I'll tell you one story and I'll wrap up. I have a labor and employment partner at a firm that I'm working at that will still remain nameless. And we are having a discussion with a black associate. She comes up and we're all standing around the secretary's office. And she says, you know, she's talking about getting married and where she's going to have her wedding reception, all this kind of stuff. And do you know what this fool said? He looked at her and he said, well, I could see if you could get into the Braeswood Country Club, but I need to check first to see if they let black people in. Board certified in labor and employment law at that. Okay, retention. Here's another thing we need to do, okay? Let's kind of think about the hunting trips, you know? Would we ever invite a lady? What about the country clubs? What about golf outings? You know, when I was growing up, they didn't let my dad in because he was black, so I never learned how to play golf. So that's not going to necessarily be a way that I'm going to develop business. And firms need to be sensitive to that. We all develop business, if we're women, differently than a man does in a lot of ways because we have emotional connections that we use that men don't. I mean, men are just kind of like, ugh, and then they do it, right? then my favorite one is the dog and pony show. You know what? You cannot go to a Fortune 500 or any size client and tell them, you know, we want your business because we value diversity at the firm, and the people who show up are all the white guys. I mean, it's like, really? You know, like, bring the people of color that you say work there. Bring the women that you say work there. They're, like, invisible. And maybe when you bring those people, maybe when you bring the women, let those be the women who are actually going to be working with that client, and not somebody over in the commercial litigation section who will never see this person again. But, I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Let me end with this. You know, we need feedback. We've got to have feedback. I mean, you cannot progress in a firm if you don't get constructive feedback. And it tends to be that men get more feedback than women do. You know, and it's because men are, we don't want to hurt her feelings. You know, we don't want it, you know, she'll cry. What the hell? I mean, you know, they think you're going to cry. Like, we have, like, gone through law school and had children. Okay? We got this. But I know it's Friday, I'm out of control. But anyway, that's kind of some of the things I'm talking about. Retention, let's make sure that we don't, you know, make assumptions about a woman's ability to practice, her career progression, because she has or doesn't have a family or wants to have a family, or because she has a partner, you know, she has a partner, she has a wife. So, you know, there's some of the kinds of things we need to think about. All right, this was like fun. Y'all have a great afternoon.